The following program is an original production of WYCC PBS Chicago.
Tonight, the race for Illinois governor is at full throttle. So are heated debates over minimum wage, the state's massive debt, and Governor Quinn's request to postpone laying out his state budget until after the March primary.
The governor and the president are on the same page about the minimum wage. They want to raise it. But some businesses say they cannot afford higher wages for the lowest paid hourly workers.
Plus, which city will land Barack Obama's presidential library? The latest on the search and the Chicago businessman leading the charge. These stories and more tonight on In the Loop.
Good evening. I'm Chris Bury.
And I'm Barbara Pinto. Tonight, millions of dollars will be spent on the governor's race, but the contest could come down to a mere $10.
Governor Pat Quinn is proposing a hike in the minimum wage to $10 an hour, and it's already shaping up to be a major issue in this election year.
Quinn's opponents and business leaders say raising the minimum wage is a bad idea, guaranteed to stall a fragile economic recovery.
But polls show a majority of Illinois residents agree that it is time for a raise.
The minimum wage here in Illinois is $1 higher than the federal rate. Tonight, we take a closer look at the impact on businesses paying it and the workers earning $8.25 an hour.
If the politicians were to have our wages, they would cry. They would. They wouldn't be able to survive.
Lizette Ortiz works the cash register at a convenience store. Her paycheck barely enough to support herself and her 5 children on Illinois minimum wage.
So it's $8.25. If I get overtime or whatever, it comes out to about $4.50 or $6.60 was my last check, and that's with the everything taken out. But that was gone within a day because I had to pay. My garbage bill was overdue. My NICOR bill was overdue. ComEd was almost overdue.
Her kids range in age from 6 to 17, and Lizette's family from southwest suburban Palos Heights is hardly alone in their struggle to make ends meet. According to the Economic Policy Institute, more than 730,000 Illinois residents earn less than $10 an hour. They serve fast food, work at convenience stores, hotels, retail stores, and as day laborers. Their 40-hour work week nets about $17,000 a year. That is $7,000 below the federal poverty line for a family of 4. President Obama's State of the Union speech highlighted their plight.
But Americans overwhelmingly agree that no one who works full-time should ever have to raise a family in poverty.
The president challenged Congress to raise the federal minimum wage from $7.25 to $10.10 an hour. One day later, in his State of the State address, Governor Quinn called on lawmakers in Springfield to do the same, raising the state's minimum from $8.25 to $10.
I said it last year, and I'll say it again. It's time to raise Illinois' minimum wage to at least $10 an hour.
Quinn's opponents in the race for governor oppose raising the state's minimum wage. Wealthy Republican businessman Bruce Rauner taking it even further.
It's critical we're competitive. We're hurting our economy by having a minimum wage above the national. We've got to move back to the national.
Rauner later called his position to lower the state's minimum wage a mistake. Still, many business leaders call the pay hike a job killer.
Just this last week, I got a message from a woman who runs a daycare center in Southern Illinois, and she said, if the government requires this $10 wage increase, I'm going to close my doors. I think the unintended consequences of raising the minimum wage are far more dramatic than I think some people expect.
The Illinois Retail Merchants Association agrees in a written statement saying raising the minimum wage will force employers to make cuts which will keep many people, especially those in the 16 to 24 age range, out of work. The Illinois Manufacturers Association takes a similar position, saying increasing the minimum wage by 21% will make our state less competitive during a time when Illinois has one of the highest unemployment rates in the U.S. To Lizette, those few extra dollars an hour would make a huge difference.
Yeah, it would benefit me. I would be able to pay my bills and might have a little bit extra to put aside to save or for an emergency, you know, because right now it's check to check, you know, it's from check to mouth and that's it. You know, I don't have nothing left over.
Joining us now to further discuss the topic of minimum wage is Cindy Cervone Carlson, Senior Vice President for outplacement firm Challenger Gray and Christmas. Cindy, we welcome you.
Thank you.
We seem to hear the same argument every time we talk about raising the minimum wage. Historically, have we seen the job losses that people fear when the minimum wage goes up?
Sure. In the past, when the minimum wage has gone up, they've said that job loss is about less than 1%. So we historically have not seen job loss impacted by minimum wage hikes.
But if it's your job?
Well, if it's my job, it's very significant. You know, statistically, these are insignificant numbers, but for those that lose their jobs and for those that have to tell these people that they've lost their jobs, it is incredibly significant to them. And we need to remember that because these are people behind all of these stats.
Now, the economic recovery here in Illinois has been among the slowest in the nation, and much of the jobs that have been gained here through the recession come from small businesses. Can they afford something like this?
Sure. So for small businesses, it's inevitably their bottom line will be impacted. Maybe there will be slower job creation, and in some cases there will be job reductions. But 2/3 of small businesses do support the minimum wage hike. And I think that's because only 2% of those employees actually are paid the minimum wage. On top of that, there may be a hit to their bottom line due to the increase, but turnover rates will go down significantly when there will be a lot of cost savings at that point.
How much cost savings can a business expect if they don't have to keep hiring because people keep leaving?
Sure. So if you pay your employees more, it costs about 55 to 400% of that employee's annual salary to rehire someone else in their position. It's a lot of money. So the small increase, again, may hit at the beginning, but you may have some incredible cost savings on the backside.
Here in Illinois, we are recovering slower than states around us. Do we need to think twice about the timing here of a state measure?
Sure, and I think the minimum wage debate is one piece of this major puzzle. There are a lot of things going on in the city of Chicago and the state of Illinois that is impacting whether organizations stay or go. Is it sensitive? Sure. Is it timely? I think we do need to talk about it. These are people's lives we're talking about.
I mean, clearly this is an economic issue, but should we see this as a moral issue as well?
Some people do look at this as a moral issue. You know, for individuals that are earning the minimum wage income, this increase will make an incredible difference in their day-to-day lives and give them more buying power. And these aren't people that are going to buy frivolous things. These are people that are going to buy things for their family at the local grocery store. You know, do we want that for the economy? Sure. And do we want, as humans, people to make more money? Absolutely, we do. But what cost is that going to be to our economy and our small businesses?
So from your perspective and from your view, kind of perched at the apex of the labor market, when you look at a minimum wage increase, who wins and who loses?
You know, this is the more research we do, it's there's more questions that arise, and you could probably argue this either way, and I'm a pretty good salesperson, I can do that. But it depends who you ask. Small businesses will be impacted, large businesses will be impacted, you know, and the individuals that make this income will be impacted in a positive way. You know, 60% of them are women. Women usually take care of the household these days, so they would definitely win in this endeavor, but you have to ask the public because everyone thinks differently.
Plus, we're used to hearing that minimum wage jobs are jobs that mostly occupied by teenagers. That doesn't seem to be the case anymore in this labor market.
You know, since the downturn in 2008, you know, folks at a higher level are taking lower jobs because they have to. But last month, 203,000 jobs were added, and the unemployment rate is at the lowest it's been since November of 2008. Those jobs are coming back, and so I think we'll see that balance out a little bit more. There will be an impact, but how significant is to be determined.
You mentioned a lot of people end up in these minimum wage jobs for a number of very significant reasons. But what does it fix long-term to raise the minimum wage?
That's a heavy question because there's so many things that we need to be doing, both in the city and the state and the nation to to end this vicious cycle that occurs of being a minimum wage earner but not being able to go get their higher education in order to get a better job. How do we go in there and help those folks at those different levels so that we can pick people up out of those levels and take them to the next one?
We've heard a lot of talk about raising the minimum wage, both from the president, from our governor. I'm wondering, do you think it's a wise political strategy for both of them to make this one of the linchpins of their campaigns?
Sure. 60% of folks do support this. So is it wise? Sure. I'm not one to really say that. That's up to their political advisor. But I think there's a lot of public support there. But it's not the only issue that we need to be looking at. There's so many out there, and people need to take those into consideration as well.
Yeah, clearly this is part of a much bigger picture.
Much bigger picture.
Cindy, we thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Now, in other trending stories tonight, the Illinois governor's race is picking up steam, and the tragic death of a Hollywood star sheds new light on a dangerous epidemic. Here's Chris with more.
Thanks, Barbara. In addition to those stories, how much is too much for a weekly allowance? $10.10. That's the new hourly minimum wage proposed by President Obama. He's asking states to pay hourly workers more.
So join the rest of the country. Say yes. Give America a raise.
I totally agree with that. That's a good move.
Governor Quinn is also on board with that, and in the Republican primary to challenge him, the race is heating up.
This is hardball in politics in Illinois. And Mr. Rauner's been very upfront about the fact of how he wants to win. I understand, so do we.
The overdose death of actor Philip Seymour Hoffman is shining a light on heroin abuse nationwide, including a growing epidemic in Illinois.
I don't know what needs to be done, but something has to be done. Maybe bring more awareness on TV.
A special task force has been created to help deal with the heroin problem in Chicago. And what's a fair weekly allowance?
I would give my kid $100 a week.
Some parents are paying their kids big bucks just for doing chores.
I mean, if you earn $50, you can have $50. But I don't think someone should be obligated to have money if they didn't earn it.
Joining us today to give us their 2 cents, our author and commentator, Arsalan Iftikhar, editor of the Chicago Daily Law Bulletin, Pat Milheiser, and news anchor and journalist, Robin Robinson. Hello, everybody, and welcome.
Hey, Chris.
So the Democrats are pushing this minimum wage hike as their big election year issue, but can the sluggish economy here handle it? What do you think, Robin?
Well, I don't know. For a long time, we've liked trickle down, domino effect, whatever you want to call it. So why does it not work here? I think that if people can't make a living wage working 40 hours or more a week, that's going to put stress on other areas that we're going to pay for, whether they're going to have some sort of assistance, we're going to pay for that. So I loved that your expert from Challenger King and Christmas said 2/3 of small business support a hike in the minimum wage. I think that's very telling.
But Pat, as we also saw, the manufacturers are opposing this, the Chamber of Commerce is opposing this, some of the heavyweight business groups think this is a bad idea for the economy.
Yeah, and it's another one of those issues where there's definitely valid arguments on both sides. As a human being, it's hard not to sympathize with someone who's making minimum wage, and that turns out to be about $17,000 a year. But businesses, somebody has to pay that, and if that means job reductions, that hurts businesses and people lose jobs as a result. I think this is going to be like any other issue where we have two strong arguments on both sides. You shoot for the moon with $10, and maybe you reach a compromise around $9 and a quarter.
Arsalan, politically, I mean, how do you think it plays out?
Well, I think it plays out well because of the fact that over 60% of the general public would support a hike in the minimum wage. A lot of people talk about the minimum wage as though it was, it takes place in a vacuum. And from a moral perspective, I think we need to talk more about a living wage and how a minimum wage does not necessarily mean that people can provide for their families and the basic staple needs of groceries, rent, electricity, and things like that. And so I think that, if you look at inflation, if minimum wage kept up with inflation, we'd have a $10.77 minimum wage. What most people also don't know is the fact that tipped workers, waiters and waitresses, have been making $2.13 as their standard hourly rate for over 20 years. And any wage hike in the last 15 years has actually been focused solely on the top 1% of the wealth in America.
When you start talking about a living wage, though, that brings up a whole another set of issues, and in Congress, they're going to have a hard enough time just getting a minimum wage passed, let alone whatever a living wage is. And don't workers have the right, especially in an improving economy, to vote with their feet and get better jobs?
Oh, I don't know that the better jobs are really out there in great numbers. We talked about the minimum wage being at one point for teenagers. Have you seen who's delivering your newspaper lately? It's a grown person or an elderly person. It's not a teenager.
I didn't know the newspapers were still delivered.
Yes, they are. Just a few of them. Yes, I'm the one subscriber that gets service to the door, but it's delivered by an old person, a 50-year-old, in a car, not a teenager, on foot or on a bike. So I don't even know that we have to, teenagers. I guess we'll talk about later, what they're supposed to get for their minimum wage in allowance, but on minimum wage, I don't think you can just say, well, I'm only making $7.50 an hour. I'm gonna go get a $15 an hour job. You say shoot for the moon at 10. Apparently, the moon is not 10. The moon is 15, because 10 is still not puts you above the poverty line.
Yeah, but I just don't think that they're going to get 10. I think that's. I have heard 15, and I think that's also not going to happen.
That would be a gigantic percentage.
Right, but I think you can reach a compromise where you do something to satisfy that side, whether it's another $1 an hour, whether it's another 75, or maybe even $1.25. And you take what you can get, and that's what we call compromise. I mean, isn't that what we do all the time?
Well, here in Illinois, Governor Quinn has been out on this issue early. Is this his most sellable point for re-election, Arsalan?
I think so, and the reason is, again, I think that this is an issue when you look at the electorate is a bipartisan one. I think that when you look at over 60% of people in Illinois who support a hike in the minimum wage, I think that this is both Democrat and Republican, and I think that this would be his one fell swoop, so to speak, that he can use against his Republican counterparts who are going to use the special interest money of business, small business and big business in the state in terms of getting the vote out and making sure that he gets 50.1% of the vote.
But where this could come back to bite him is, okay, you're in favor of the minimum wage, but what about this income tax increase that's set to expire next year? They passed that under the impression that it would be temporary. And we're not getting any clear indication from Quinn.
And we may not, because he's not going to give his budget speech until after the primary.
He's pushing that off. The Republican candidates kind of differ slightly on it, but I think for the most part they want to keep this temporary. And what does that do? Okay, so you raise minimum wage, but you keep a tax hike in place that takes money out of our paycheck.
And speaking of the Republicans, Bruce Rauner was against raising the minimum wage before he was for it, but now he's got some other issues because he's being accused by Dan Rutherford of having one of his employees raise these allegations. As we saw in the setup piece, it looks like on the Republican side there's a lot of hardball.
There's fireworks going on.
Is this good for the Republicans?
I mean, the race is taking kind of a soap opera turn. I mean, you had that Rauner. He started as the front runner, so he was getting attacked for allegedly clouding his daughter into Peyton High School. Rutherford is facing accusations from a former Treasurer's Office employee of harassment, which is also kind of interesting.
Which he says is orchestrated by the Rauner
Which is coming up
campaign,
now, and why didn't this come up sooner? Sure. The candidate I think who could stand to gain from this is Kirk Dillard, because I feel that he's the only one who could really give Governor Quinn a challenge in a general election.
But does the party gain from having 4 guys battle it out, having a bloody primary battle? You would think that the Republicans could have gotten it. They have an opportunity. Quinn isn't exactly the strongest candidate. It's not like he's, untouchable. If they could get behind one candidate, maybe 2 at the most, but 4 guys, really?
And I think the big winner in this is Pat Quinn. I think that if I were the governor right now, I'd get a big bucket of popcorn and I would just sit back and see who comes out of the fray. I think it was a brilliant political move on his part to push his budget remarks past the primary, because there's a saying.
Isn't there some shenanigans about that, though? I mean, there's very likely, as we heard, there's very likely bad news coming up in that budget speech, which may be that this income tax increase is going to be made permanent.
There's a very famous saying amongst millennials is don't hate the player, hate the game, right? And that's exactly what's going on here. If it were a Republican governor going against who was waiting for 4 Democratic challengers to come out of the fray, I'm sure their political strategists would also tell them, move it past the primary so they can't use your speech and your talking points as fodder in their primary election. It's a brilliant move.
And everybody's not going to think that it's bad news that the temporary income tax hike is going to be extended or become permanent, because if it expires, that's $1.6 billion that won't be coming into our coffers. We're already $5 billion in the hole. And I mean, I don't think
no one wants to hear tax raise talk right before an election. You know, last year when Bill Daley dropped out on the Democratic side, Hillary Clinton called Pat Quinn the luckiest man in American politics, and it looks like that luck is continuing. Whoever is governor next year is going to have to deal with this big heroin epidemic. We saw the tragic news this week of Philip Seymour Hoffman, the very talented actor, die of a heroin overdose. Illinois is one of the worst states by all accounts. What can the governor do about it?
Wow, I don't know. Take it off the shelves at CVS. I'm thinking, you know, heroin, we've been doing this story. 10 years ago, I talked about the heroin epidemic in the suburbs, that actually use among young people in the city was going down because they can see the results right there on the corner. There's Joe the junkie, I don't want to be him. Whereas in the suburbs, it was kind of had this cachet of, you know, we're not junkies, we're not shooting, we're just snorting. It's just kind of cool, and there's nothing else to do, and it's easy to get, and it's cheap. And that was the exact same situation. It's been going on for years.
Huge
and
business.
Philip, you know, I mean, the actor, I mean, it's a very sad and tragic story, but not any more tragic than, you know, the hundreds of young people who are affected every day in the suburbs of Chicago.
This week, the DEA, the head of the DEA here in Chicago, said that 100,000 people in the Chicago area are making their livings selling heroin.
And it is such a tragic cycle, because you don't just have the users dying of this product, you have the sellers getting killed. I mean, that is the turf battle between the gangs. Drugs are the lifeblood, and it is just one endless cycle of violence and death. And we don't have answers. As a governor, I don't know what you do other than start looking at, we've seen legalization on medical marijuana. Do you start going that direction with harder drugs?
That's a big step.
I think with
heroin.
opiates, you're going to have to focus your money on the treatment side, because we cannot arrest our way out of this. And you know, I had a family member who was a heroin addict for 20 years. My brother died of AIDS, and I've done a lot of stories about how hard it is to kick. You can see people that have everything throw it all away. Philip Seymour Hoffman was clean for 22 years. As far as the difficulty of kicking it, they say it's hardest to lose weight, then cigarettes, then opiates. But so it's third, but it's still nearly impossible. So it's not just killing the people and the sellers, but the families are just devastated by.
Well, what's interesting to me is the fact that, you know, when we see a high-profile actor like Philip Seymour Hoffman die of a heroin overdose, you know, we talk about it as though it was some sort of national tragedy. But when a heroin addict dies, you know, on the streets of the South Side, they were just an addict. And so, you know, we have to look at the treatment side of it. You know, over 100 people every single day in America die of heroin overdose. 30,000 people a year. These people are not being given the treatment for addictions. They're not being given to access to methadone and other treatment facilities that would help them conquer that addiction. And only when high-profile deaths like Philip Seymour Hoffman's come around, then we look at it as a tragedy. But we turn a blind eye every single day when hundreds of Americans die of this every single day.
Not that treatment's very effective. About 10 to 20% of people go to rehab for heroin actually succeed, and then for how long? So prevention would be really the most effective
In the
thing.
meantime, the law enforcement is spending about $1 million on this new task force. You know, maybe it is arresting their way out of the problem, but it does, as you suggest, lead to serious crime in Chicago.
And anytime you arrest, there's always another crop of employees, so to speak, in the gangs ready to come up. So
it's the demand. The demand is there. You have to hit it from all points, and I don't think just law enforcement. That $1 million into some treatment and prevention programs, I think, might be better spent.
Finally, we have to take a quick moment to update the new information on allowances, which is shocking. A Reuters study says the number of families giving their kids at least $50 has quadrupled since 2011. So as somebody who made, I think, $2 mowing the lawn, that seems like huge inflation to me.
Please mow mine for $2. $50, what does that really get you? A kid's going to live on $7 a day. You can't even. That's why they eat so much McDonald's. You know, they're looking for the cheapest bang for their buck.
Does that sound extravagant to you?
It's $45 higher than when I was a kid. But I think, you know, today I think allowances are a good thing, because I think it's good to get kids started with cash and actually learning how to use cash, because, you know, as you get older and you get into your late teens and you're in college, the credit card companies start coming at you, and that's where a lot of young people get in trouble. So $50 does seem high. I think it's just the day that, the times that we live in.
Well, is it inflation, Arsalan, or is it this generation of kids is more entitled?
I think they're more entitled. I think it's, keeping up with the Joneses. I like to use what I like to call the Xbox or the PlayStation test. And so if you're giving a kid $50 a week, in 8 weeks they can save up to $400 to get a PlayStation or Xbox. I don't think 2 months of saving should warrant a new game system. If you gave them $10 a week and it took them 40 weeks, almost 1 year, to get to that Xbox and PlayStation, I think there's an element of discipline there. Now, this might be the Cosby generation kid in me coming out who got $10 a week, but I think it is extravagant.
All right, Arsalan, we have to wrap it up on that note. Thank you so much. Arsalan Iftikhar, Pat Milheiser, and Robin Robinson, thanks for your insights today. Many Chicagoans are not shy about their desire to see President Obama's presidential library come to Chicago. The announcement is expected within a year, so the race among cities staking a claim to the president is already well underway.
I would love to have the presidential library here in Chicago. I think it's a good idea.
Martin Nesbitt, a Chicago businessman and close friend of the president, is among 3 of his supporters heading up the nonprofit Barack H. Obama Foundation. They are overseeing the job of securing proposals from those interested in housing the library. Chicago, Hawaii, and New York have been considered the front runners, but more cities and states are expected to place their bids for the library.
What we've tried to do in creating this process is create a level playing field to get a broad spectrum of interest across the country and get proposals from all over the place. I don't know where they may come from. I imagine that those places will be included in the group that ultimately submit responses to this request for qualifications. But where the library ends up going will be completely a function of the quality of the submittals that each of these parties put together.
In Chicago, several sites have been identified as potential locations for the library. The University of Chicago, the University of Illinois at Chicago, Chicago State University, and some others.
The timing for the process is we'll in the next couple of weeks or so, we will release this request for qualifications. We expect that over a 60 or 90-day period, we will get responses back and evaluate those. And then we will narrow it down to a smaller subset of respondents to go to a more detailed request for a proposal process. And then by early next year, first quarter 2015, we will make the ultimate selection of which site will host the presidential library.
Ultimately, the president and the first lady will make the final decision. They have already told the foundation leaders what they have in mind.
They've shared a vision about what the library ought to be broadly. A place that promotes the pride of citizenship in America, place that promotes fairness and equality and economic opportunity for people all over the world. We hope that the library ends up being a point of pride for the entire country, wherever it is.
To see more of our interview with Martin Nesbitt, log on to our website, WYCC.org. Look for In the Loop.
Well, that's it for tonight. You are now in the loop. Join us online for the after show, where we'll talk about a major drugstore's decision to halt tobacco sales and the special prosecutor's report in the David Koshman case. Log on to WYCC.org and look for In the Loop.
Until next time, I'm Chris Bury.
And I'm Barbara Pinto. Good night.